the Ozark Mountains, Jason was busy making knives, and his blacksmithing business was thriving. As a result, his need for charcoal increased. Today he planned to turn wood into homemade charcoal using a barrel burner he designed himself. The key to making charcoal is controlling the temperature. The wood should not burn to ash but maintain around 800 degrees Celsius for 12 hours to produce high-quality charcoal. Since the barrel could deform under high temperatures, Jason reinforced it around the edges. He combined 2 barrels and then designed a grill to insert inside. Next, he constructed a firebox to provide the heat. Now, he needed to assemble everything and ensure the welds were sealed to prevent heat loss. With everything ready, he and Mary moved the burning barrel outside onto a 3-inch thick layer of gravel for insulation. They then surrounded the sides of the barrel with mud to prevent heat leakage and sealed both ends of the barrel to make it completely airtight. Jason brought some high-quality pine wood, packed it tightly, and covered it with a lid. The final step was to seal the burning barrel completely with mud. The remaining task was to light the fire. Jason planned to burn it for 12 hours, hoping for success. The next day, Jason removed the mud covering the barrel. It was time to see the results. When he opened the lid, he saw some charcoal but was slightly disappointed because it was a bit overburnt. He needed the finished product he was holding, but the charcoal could still be used. This was his first attempt, and he believed the results would improve with more practice. A round hole has been made in the floor to fit the stovepipe. This is in cold Alaska, where Morgan and Marg spent months building a small cabin, now nearing completion. Due to the spacious interior, to ensure it stays warm, Morgan invested in a 4-foot double-burner wood stove with an oven, a luxury in the wilderness. Marg, who had struggled with a smaller stove, was eager to install this new one. However, fitting the stovepipe through the ceiling came with risks, as continuous high temperatures could potentially start a fire. To address this, Morgan designed a sturdy little box called a stovepipe adapter. He secured it to the ceiling first, which meant there was no worry about the wood catching fire. Next, they ran the stovepipe through this box from the attic floor to the roof, reinforcing every joint along the pipe. The final step was installing a chimney cap, 25 feet above the ground on the roof. Morgan had to be careful as the cap prevents rain from entering the pipe, which could cause rust. He used a drill to secure it in place. The crucial moment came when he needed to cut through the cabin walls. After some thought, he used a chainsaw to make an opening, reinforcing the lower parts with planks to prevent the wall from collapsing. He meticulously cut the wood, piece by piece, to keep an eye on the wall's condition, and luckily, no cracks formed. The work was progressing smoothly until he suddenly stopped. His chainsaw had hit a nail. Now he had to cut manually. After removing the boards, they indeed found a nail, but eventually managed to break through the wall successfully. Then Marg fetched some firewood from outside, and they prepared to start a fire in the stove to test its effectiveness. Both were excited about this. Marg boiled a pot of water for drinking. They sat on stools, watching their handiwork with pride. Life in the wilderness, filled with challenges, was satisfying for them, as they enjoyed creating something out of nothing. Mike hunted a goat and obtained 60 pounds of meat, securing his meat supply for the coming months. Now he can focus on his work as a bear guide. Living alone on Kodiak Island, he faces the last few weeks of winter, a dangerous period as hungry brown bears awaken from hibernation. Mike is tracking them. He anchored his large boat and launched a canoe with his rifle and hunting dog, heading ashore. Kodiak bears are aggressive, especially after hibernation, craving any food, so Mike must be cautious. He plans to visit a location where he has hidden cameras, as bear hunting season is approaching, and tourists will pay well for the experience. Mike needs to know the area well to prevent accidents. Soon, he finds a bear trail and fresh droppings, indicating a bear, about 7 or 8 years old, has been eating kelp on the beach, showing it's not well. Mike decides to inspect the beach with binoculars but sees no bear. He proceeds to the camera location, only to find his camera fallen and broken, likely destroyed by a bear smelling human scent. Frustrated, Mike intensifies his search for the bear. He heads to a frequently used lookout tower on the mountain. Over the next 6 weeks, he will stay alert and log every bear sighting, preparing thoroughly for the tourists. Despite not seeing any bears, Mike patrols the ridge. After searching, he spots a bear on the opposite ridge, which seems to notice him too, acknowledging each other. The bear looks emaciated, likely just out of hibernation. Hunting will start in 6 weeks, giving the bear time to regain its strength. Mike hides a tent in a large tree to avoid being without shelter in emergencies. After completing these tasks, he decides to head home. This is a moose hide that Tom is smoking. Although he has smoked countless hides in his lifetime, he is very nervous today because it's his wife, Nancy's 70th birthday. Tom plans to give her a carefully crafted gift. The leather is almost ready, so he brings it inside to make a pair of beautiful moose leather shoes, inspired by the first Native Americans of the Bison Valley. Native Americans used moose leather for soft shoes that were warm and comfortable. As Tom works, he reflects on the past. When they moved here, Tom was 35 and Nancy was 5 years younger. They have spent 40 loving years together. While reminiscing, Tom decides to add another gift, a necklace made from wolf bones. His memory goes back to 1966 when he found a book at a market detailing how Native Americans used animal brains to tan hides. Amazed, he bought the book and started his hunting career. 40 years later, his skills have perfected, making him a renowned artist. The heels of the moose leather shoes feature 2 tags, a Native American tradition to ward off evil spirits from entering the body through the feet. Tom adds bead decorations around the toes, bringing the shoes to life. Next, he sews the tongue that flips over the top and adds laces. The shoes, compared to old ones, look fantastic. Next, Tom makes the wolf bone necklace, inspired by Native American culture, where the wolf symbolizes courage, strength, and loyalty. He drills holes in 16 wolf toe bones, secures them with pliers, and drills slowly. The centerpiece of the necklace is a 350-year-old bead from Italy called a chevron. Tom assembles the necklace and tries it on. It looks beautiful. He wraps the gifts, and soon Nancy returns from town. Tom hands her the gifts. With anticipation, Nancy opens the package, tries on the shoes, and they fit perfectly. The surprise isn't over. She bursts into tears of joy when Tom presents the necklace. She loves the gift. Tom's romance always catches her off guard. This is their simple and happy life. Blacksmithing is a job filled with both brute force and aesthetics. A hard piece of steel is shaped at will in the hands of a man, creating a mesmerizing sense of satisfaction. Deep in the Ozark Mountains, Jason has set up his own forge where he profits from crafting knives. Today, he plans to make a special tool. He starts with a steel block nearly 2 inches wide. First, he heats it in the furnace until it glows red, then places it on the hydraulic press to punch a notch in the middle. After more heating until the steel is red hot again, he squeezes out a bevel at the front end. He allows it to cool, then cuts the steel in half with a cutting machine. The next step involves heating the steel again. Once it's red hot, he hammers along the cut line to widen the gap. He continues hammering until the crack reaches a certain angle. The crucial part of the project follows, bending the 2 strips inward like a half-clenched fist. Then he heats the steel to 2,400 degrees, the melting point of steel. Jason must carefully control the temperature to avoid melting the steel. After a while, feeling the timing is right, he removes the steel and places it into an iron post for hammering. His goal is to completely close the front end, a strenuous and enduring process. After dozens of strikes, he achieves the desired result. Another heating session follows. Then he stretches the metal to gradually form the shape of an axe. However, the process isn't over yet. Since the steel is low carbon and relatively soft, Jason marks lines on the axe and uses a cutting machine to notch a 1/4-inch wide slit at the front. This is to weld a harder, high-carbon steel strip onto the front of the axe. After enlarging the slit, he prepares to insert a high-carbon drill bit. Once this is done, he trims off the excess material. Next comes the critical welding phase. The 2 different metals have different acceptance temperatures, and Jason must manage this carefully. He rhythmically hammers the red-hot axe head, which looks promising. The next step is quenching by rapidly cooling it in oil to harden it. After this process, he obtains a high-quality axe. Jason sharpens the axe blade and fits a corrosion-resistant handle, completing a Viking war axe. He tests it in the woods, and the results are very satisfying. This axe can bring in $500 in revenue. The lynx is a top predator, not only eating hares, but also daring to attack larger reindeer. However, this forest dominator now lies quietly in a trap. This is cold Alaska, where a days-long blizzard has swept the land, bringing with it a bountiful harvest. Marty's first trap caught a mink, justifying his hard work through the snowstorm. This year, he has experienced unprecedented success, setting new records for trapping prey every day. With only 1 month left of winter, Marty's goal is to make the most of each day. However, there's a variable in his plan. Recently, lynxes have appeared nearby, also preying on minks, posing a significant risk to Marty's livelihood. Therefore, he sets traps for lynxes, whose fur is very valuable. Catching one would be a double win. Soon, Marty catches a second mink, but he can't feel happy because the heavy snow continues. If the snow gets too thick, his snowmobile will struggle to pass, and he has only checked half of his traps. Battling the biting cold wind, he hurries to check the remaining traps. The next area is densely wooded, a common habitat for hares and an active area for lynxes. With apprehension, Marty approaches the traps and is not disappointed. A strong lynx lies quietly on the ground. Its soft fur is irresistible to touch. After playing with it for a while, Marty releases the trap, securing $200 in income, brightening his mood. He continues to the next location, but unexpectedly, his snowmobile gets stuck on a branch. Marty tries to pull the branch out, but fails. The temperature keeps dropping. He switches to another branch, and this time, he succeeds. After clearing all the branches, he continues on his way. However, as evening approaches and night is not suitable for staying outdoors, Marty decides to head home. Continuous blizzards have troubled the residents of Alaska. For the Morgans, who live alone in the remote mountains, this is their busiest time. They are clearing brush to prepare for an important delivery. They have bought an airplane and need to clear a runway before it arrives. Fortunately, they are only dealing with small trees, which are not too difficult to cut down. However, they are working separately for safety, as falling trees pose a danger, especially since the hospital is far away. While cutting a tree, it didn't fall in the planned direction, but ended up leaning on another tree. Morgan tried to push it over, but it wouldn't budge. He then cut down a nearby tree, which brought the original tree down with it. This method worked, and soon most of the trees on the runway were cleared. However, there's still much cleanup work to be done, and another blizzard is approaching. They need to speed up as once the snow covers the ground, it will obscure any obstacles, posing a significant risk to landing aircraft. Morgan focuses on removing tree stumps, which are critical obstacles. Once the major clearing is done, they begin measuring the runway, which needs to be at least 1,200 feet for safe takeoffs and landings. Since their tape measure is only 100 feet long, they mark and move forward incrementally. However, they reach a creek to the east at 1,000 feet, so they must clear an additional 200 feet to the west. They resume the laborious task of cutting down trees. Soon, heavy snow begins to fall, but fortunately, their task is nearly complete. With the last large tree felled, the runway is finally clear at 1,200 feet. Now, they need to cut the trees into firewood and move them to their yard, a beneficial task. Their hard work today is worthwhile. Now, they just wait for the snow to stop and then welcome the arrival of the airplane. Jason, holding a shotgun, ventured into the wilderness aiming to hunt a deer. He had been busy blacksmithing, but with his meat supply running low, he reluctantly left his work to search for game in the forest. Unexpectedly, he stumbled upon something unusual, a pile of metal debris. On closer inspection, he realized it was the wreckage of an airplane. Fortunately, there were no bodies visible. Jason wondered whether the pilot was eaten by wild animals or had managed to escape. After examining the wreckage, he concluded that the plane had crashed and caught fire. He hoped the pilot had survived. The metal from the plane could still be used, potentially bringing in thousands of dollars in raw materials. Jason rushed home to bring his motorcycle and some tools. He started cutting the metal. Steel, made from iron ore and pure carbon, is one of the strongest alloys on Earth. The higher the carbon content, the harder the steel. However, the composition of the steel from the airplane needed testing at his forge to be determined. His task now was to dismantle the frame. He used a blowtorch to burn through the joints, forcefully disassembling the frame. For longer pieces of steel, he cut them in the middle. The quality of the steel seemed good, but his celebration was cut short when his blowtorch ran out of gas. With no choice left, he packed up his tools and loaded the steel onto his vehicle to test its quality at home. Back at his forge, Jason took out several pieces of steel and began testing them. Recently, he had been searching for high-carbon steel. With hopeful anticipation, he hammered the end of a steel rod until it was flat. This test revealed that the steel had low carbon content, indicating high ductility, which meant it couldn't be used for making knives. Jason then tested another piece of metal. After hammering it and cooling it in water, the rapid temperature change made the steel brittle, a sign of hardenable steel, exactly what Jason was looking for. It turned out that some parts of the airplane were made of low-carbon steel, while others were high-carbon steel, enough for Jason to forge some knives. This was an unexpected surprise. This is a traditional Native American spear, representing primitiveness and wildness, and is an important hunting weapon. Its creation began this morning when Tom, living in Bison River Valley, received an order for a primitive spear. This type of spear, with a stone blade, was used by Native Americans in the distant past to hunt American bison. The first step in making the spear is obtaining a suitable handle, and walnut wood is the best material because it is very strong. However, its hardness also makes it challenging to work with. Tom had to reduce a log to a perfect handle, a significant challenge for the aging craftsman. He refused to use any power tools because handcrafting primitive weapons is a profound respect for tradition. He huffed and puffed as he chopped the wood, and after some time, the wood took shape. Tom placed it into a special tool known as a shaving horse, which has a clamp to hold the wood and a foot-operated lever to secure it. This allowed Tom to use both hands to work on the log, scraping off all the bumps. After this, he sanded it down to achieve a smooth handle, essential for a deadly strike when hunting bison. Next was the creation of the stone blade, not Tom's forte. He called his friend Bob, a master at stone grinding. Flint knapping is an ancient technique for shaping raw stones into blades or arrowheads. The ideal blade is thick and rounded in the middle for strength and sharp and tapered at the front. To achieve this, Bob made clean cuts around the edges and then used a copper chisel for finer cuts. His skilled hands quickly created a flint blade. Tom admired the masterpiece before him, and it was now time to assemble. He sought a slot in the handle to insert the stone blade. To secure it, Tom needed to make pitch glue, nature's original strong adhesive, using pine pitch, buffalo dung, charred particles, eggshells, and beeswax. He heated them together to form the pitch glue. Tom first used animal tendons to secure the blade, then sealed it with the pitch glue. He sewed bison leather around the middle of the handle and decorated the end with a feather. Historically, Native Americans used eagle feathers, but since eagles are protected, Tom used wild turkey feathers instead. He added a final touch, a mink decoration tied at the rear of the blade for strength. The final step was to carve Tom's unique mark at the end of the handle. A stylish yet formidable weapon was born, capable of bringing Tom $1,000 in revenue. Meanwhile, in Montana's Ruby Valley, Jake and his 3 hunting dogs were chasing a cougar. Soon, he realized the gravity of the situation when he found 2 sets of lion tracks in the snow. Cougars are known to be solitary with a strong sense of territory, yet now there were 2 tracks, likely a mother with her cub. Such a situation could be dangerous, as the mother would fiercely protect her young. Jake hoped both cougars were treed together, because if they were separated, it could complicate matters. He followed the tracks and soon heard the loud barking of his dogs. They had cornered the cougar. Jake ran quickly to the scene and found a young cougar perched in a tree. Judging by its size, it was a juvenile. 2 of his dogs were barking intensely at it below. Jake approached quietly to avoid startling the young lion. The cougar appeared terrified, its aggressive expression reflecting fear. It was about a year old and had never encountered such a situation, which was deeply traumatic for it. All it wanted was to find its mother, but she and the 3rd dog were nowhere to be seen. Jake left with 2 of his dogs to look for the 3rd. The young cougar watched silently as Jake put the dogs in his truck and then set off alone to track the 3rd dog. After some searching, he finally spotted the mother cougar in a tree with the hunting dog below, attempting to climb up. Jake tried to call it off, but the dog was stuck in a difficult position and the mother cougar was ready to attack. Frantically calling, Jake finally got the dog to jump down, fortunately unharmed. With the hunt over, Jake gathered the dogs back into the truck and headed home. Morgan finally owns his own airplane, a plan 4 years in the making. Although it is a second-hand aircraft, he is very excited. Since settling in the Alaskan wilderness, his travel options have been limited. But this plane marks a significant step towards self-sufficiency. The first thing Morgan needs to do, since the plane has been sitting here for a while and the fuel could freeze below zero, is to warm it up. He places a heater under the engine to heat it up, a process that takes about an hour. During this time, he clears the snow off the plane. Frost on the wings can be deadly for takeoff. Even a thin layer of ice can have terrifying consequences. Morgan meticulously clears every corner, knowing that life is precious. When the time is up, he feels the engine hood and finds it warm enough, so he removes the heater. Next is the ignition. The plane is nearly 50 years old and requires gentle handling. Morgan slowly engages the clutch and turns the switch. With a loud noise, the propeller starts working hard, and Morgan smiles with satisfaction. However, his expression soon freezes as something seems wrong. The control panel is hotter than usual, so he stops the plane and seeks local mechanics to diagnose the engine problem. The mechanic prepares to test the engine's compression. The plane has 4 cylinders, and damage to any of them could mean replacing the entire engine, a costlier option than the old plane itself. Morgan worries deeply. Fortunately, the first 2 cylinders test fine. The mechanic checks the remaining 2, and luckily, they are also fine, relieving Morgan greatly. The mechanic suspects the issue lies with the intake valves of the cylinders. He replaces the rubber gaskets, and they reattach the engine cover. The next step is to test the fix. They push the plane outside, and Morgan tries to start it again. This time, the plane functions normally. Morgan thanks the mechanic, but it's too late in the day to fly. He decides to wait until tomorrow to return home. The old man, dragging a canoe, is struggling to move forward. This year, Tom's yield is not as good as last year's. Although his apprentice Sean has been diligently setting traps, with spring approaching, their time is running out. Therefore, Tom personally takes action, planning to head to a promising location. If all goes well, their catch could surpass last season's. However, for a 75-year-old man, dragging a canoe for 2 miles is a strenuous task, involving making paths through mountains and building bridges over water. Just as he was nearing his destination, an accident happened. Tom slipped and fell, but fortunately he was not injured. He struggled to his feet and continued on his way, proceeding cautiously for the rest of the journey and safely arriving at his destination. Tom wiped the sweat from his forehead, feeling the relentless passage of time. The pond in front of him is home to a beaver family, but he needs to investigate their breeding situation. Soon after entering the water, he spotted a tree branch chewed by beavers, confirming their presence. Tom aimed to find the most active area of the beavers and set traps there. Paddling the canoe, he constantly scanned his surroundings and quickly found a beaver dam. The creek in front of him served as their food passage, making it an ideal spot for setting traps. Tom pulled out a trap and placed it in the water, securing it with an iron stake. He then took out a secret sauce made from beaver glands and smeared it on the shore. Beavers identify each other through gland secretions, so the presence of a foreign scent would likely attract local beavers to investigate. The water body was large enough to sustain 3 families, with each beaver family having up to 12 members. A beaver pelt is worth $200, which is the grand prize Tom is hoping for. He quickly found a second beaver tunnel and set another trap at its entrance. Tom's success is due to his understanding of the prey's habits and knowing where to place traps effectively. Just then, Tom was attracted by a rustling sound. It seemed like there was an animal ahead, resembling a porcupine. Tom approached, drew his handgun, and fired at the small tree. The porcupine fell to the ground, startling a large bird in the process, but Tom was too focused on the porcupine to notice. Not only is porcupine meat edible, but its quills can also be used by Tom to make brushes, a pleasant surprise. Full of anticipation for this area, Tom dragged the porcupine back home. Native Americans use porcupine quills to create circular decorations worn on their war garments. Research shows that a porcupine has about 30,000 quills. Tom carefully removed some of the sharper quills from its back. With just a few days left in the season, all his hopes were pinned on the beaver pond. Despite being busy, Tom's thoughts were already on the beavers. A few days later, Tom and Sean checked the traps. With the arrival of spring, the melting snow from the mountains flowed into the Kootenai River, making the current swift. As they floated downstream, they finally reached the first trap and found a beaver carcass, which instantly cheered them up. The first trap had been successful, and they sensed that today would be climactic. Due to rising water levels, setting more traps was impossible. After collecting the traps, they continued downstream. At the second trap, unfortunately, the entrance was blocked by logs. They searched and finally found a mink trap box, but it was empty. The two continued to the next location. The raging river was daunting, and falling in could be life-threatening, so they were extra cautious. However, a problem arose. The trap was on the opposite riverbank. Crossing the swift river seemed nearly impossible. After some consideration, they decided to find a calmer spot downstream to land, and then walk back to the trap. Despite the challenging journey, they couldn't afford to give up any potential earnings, and their efforts proved worthwhile when they caught another beaver in the trap. The season ended perfectly, marking 2 consecutive years of profit, which left both men feeling exceptionally content. A man and his dog live on a deserted island, making a living by bear hunting. They reside on Kodiak Island in southern Alaska, home to large brown bears. Mike is a bear hunting guide, and with 2 weeks until bear hunting season begins, he has a lot of preparations to make. This season is crucial as it generates more than half of his annual income. Today, Mike is set to take his boat to town to buy supplies. He chose this day because he had been waiting for weeks for the right tide. After some time, the tide was high enough. Mike used a small boat to tow the barge into deeper waters. He then tied the small boat to the barge to power it and set off. He planned to travel along the beach for a distance before crossing the bay. Unknown to Mike, the weather was about to change drastically. As he prepared to cross the bay, he noticed the tide was off and the waves grew rougher. Mike was tense, anticipating a real struggle. Fortunately, his luck held, and the weather did not worsen. Mike successfully reached the beach, parked the barge ashore, and rode his motorcycle onto the land. He then pulled the barge up onto the beach. After shutting off the small boat's engine, Mike asked a friend to help gather the needed supplies and haul them to the beach. These included roofing materials, an ATV, 2 barrels of fuel, and 2 propane bottles. Now, Mike had to transfer all these supplies onto the barge. He first tried to pull the roofing materials onto the boat using a winch, but the rope suddenly snapped. Realizing this method was ineffective, he resorted to moving them by hand. However, he soon faced another challenge. The metal supplies weighed 1,200 pounds. Using the principle of leverage, Mike used an iron rod to push them onto the boat. He then moved the remaining items onto the barge and secured them with ropes. It was time to head back, but the heavy load caused the barge to sit deep in the water, and the tide was going out. Mike missed the ideal time to return. The next day, after the tide had receded, Mike inspected the barge and found a leak. He temporarily repaired it with new sealant. 3 hours later, as the tide came in again, Mike seized the opportunity. He pushed the barge and slowly made his way back. It was dark by the time Mike reached the shore, concluding his shopping trip. Morgan bought a second-hand airplane and, after fixing its faults, faced bad weather. He stayed in town for a week until spring fully arrived. Finally, Morgan was ready to fly, but he faced a challenging 150-mile journey home. The first 60 miles were through dense forests and swamps, followed by continuous mountains, the Alaskan Range, the 3rd highest in the world, with peaks over 20,000 feet high. Flying over these mountains was a daunting prospect, especially for a novice pilot like Morgan. He carefully studied the map and noted several emergency landing spots. His main task today was to establish an emergency fuel supply hidden between the town and his home. This would help him manage any future flights during unexpected storms. Morgan then checked the airplane thoroughly, following a checklist to ensure everything was in order. He noticed the tires were low on air, so he inflated them and was now ready to take off. With a mix of anxiety and excitement, Morgan started his journey. The plane took off successfully after a brief acceleration. The flight was smooth until he approached the dangerous peaks of Alaska. Deciding to land, Morgan chose this spot because it was the last gravel runway on the route, making it an ideal location for hiding emergency fuel. Morgan landed smoothly and took out 2 empty fuel barrels, filling them with enough fuel for 50 miles of flying, a potential lifesaver. He covered the barrels with a garbage bag to protect them from rainwater. Soon, brushwood would grow and conceal the garbage bag from view. Morgan just needed to remember this spot. Before taking off again, he called Marg to check the weather at home. It was raining, and though the clouds were moving, Marg advised him to wait an hour as thunderstorms posed a significant risk to small planes. As he waited, Rain started falling where he was too. Morgan was relieved yet anxious for the rain to stop. It seemed the rain wouldn't end easily, so he collected some rainwater to make coffee, sensing he might have to spend the night outdoors. After the rain cleared, Morgan woke up from his sleep with the last 75 miles to go home, also the most dangerous part of his journey. He needed to cross the Grand Alaskan Range, where winds blow constantly at 50 miles per hour year-round, and the weather conditions were uncertain. Morgan called Marg again and learned that the weather was clear at his homestead, so he was ready to take off. He checked every part of the airplane, and confident that there were no issues, he started his return journey. After leaving the forest, the plane entered the mountain range. The Alaskan Range stretches for 40 miles, filled with treacherous ice peaks and ravaged valleys. Even experienced pilots would feel intimidated here. The challenge was to choose the safest route. A wrong turn into turbulent air could put the plane in peril. Since this was Morgan's first time flying this route, everything was unknown. As he crossed the first mountain ridge, the plane climbed continuously, reaching an altitude of 10,000 feet, higher than ever before. Excited, Morgan pulled out his map to match the terrain, hoping to familiarize himself with the area for future flights. Suddenly, clouds drifted in from nowhere, causing Morgan to panic as visibility dropped by 50%. Morgan's situation became dangerous instantly. He tried to descend to find clearer air near the mountain pass, a maneuver demanding high pilot skill. Holding his breath, Morgan carefully controlled the plane, moving swiftly between two peaks. He quickly passed the first ridge, and no further incidents occurred. He crossed the last ridge and finally entered the area of his homestead. Landing was critical. Although he and Marg had cleared a runway, it had never been tested. Morgan slowly decreased altitude, and after flying over the forest, the tires touched the ground. The plane bounced and stumbled before stabilizing on the runway. Marg greeted him with a smile. Since Morgan first set foot on this land 4 years ago, through his relentless efforts, he now had both a wife and an airplane, and his quality of life had significantly improved. This was the lifestyle he had always hoped for.